correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello Gamer Nation and welcome to the Dice Ball podcast covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesis role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hurley. This episode we've got a very different show for you which we think you'll enjoy, but for now I'd like to introduce you to the people who knocked back Barnaby Joyce's advances. My co-hosts and friends GM Huz, GM Flano and GM Caitlin. How are we all this evening?
You assumed I knocked back the advances.
Well, okay.
The more you know.
And for those people who don't know who Barnaby Joyce is, go and Google it. You'll be entertained.
With safe search on.
Not safe at work.
No.
Yes, very good.
Cushy jobs.
Yeah. So what's everybody been up to gaming this week? Michael?
Well, this week I've been playing a lot of Infinity, the tabletop game, with GM Flano. We've also done a little bit of Star Wars. We've done Junkyard Heroes, and we recently just kicked off Dragon Squadron again for the first time in many, many months. So that's been pretty awesome. So the general fare, really, tabletop gaming and RPGing, so you can't go wrong with that.
Indeed. Martin?
Well, pretty much the same.
We kind of live together almost, don't we?
Oh, wait, and Rainbow Six. Lots of Rainbow Six.
Lots of Rainbow Six.
You only Rainbow Six?
No, but I've actually been playing in the video game space. Apart from all of that, I've been playing a game called Heat Signature, which is a little sci-fi game on Steam. And it's inspired me to write up some bits for Genesis, so keep your eye out for that. And I'll eventually get to it when
when we have time.
When we have time. And yeah, we'll see what happens there.
And people have been asking about your Pathfinder game. How's that going?
The Pathfinder game. What did we do last?
It's obviously very exciting.
No.
Riveting.
The last thing that we did, I believe, was we were traveling to the Steel Empire of Isilmortka in order to kill the Lich Queen of that empire. So we were hunting down the artifacts in order to destroy her phylactery.
Cool.
So,
interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Caitlin, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
So it's pretty much the same as everyone else. We practically live together. I was really excited to play in Dragon Squadron again and play my character Vixto and bring her back to life and find out her backstory a little bit more. So that was a lot of fun for me.
To find the reason why there's an IX in the name.
Correct. And that there's multiple versions of me. So that was emotional and intense and amazing. So I'm really excited to see then in future sessions of that what happens with that one. And then other than that, it's just been pretty much just some video games myself, just in between the time whenever I'm not working and whenever I'm not here, which isn't actually a lot of time as it is, but playing a lot of my Horizon Zero Dawn and some of the expansions that's come out for that, playing a bit of that. That's about it.
Very good.
Speaking of Dragon Squadron, you know what we should do? We should put our characters up on the Facebook page.
That would be cool.
So people can see what 1,000 XP character looks like in Star Wars.
It's like 1,200 or something.
No, it's 1,000 earned, thereabouts, give or take.
Yeah.
Basically, my character has got so much charm that she could be killing puppies in front of someone and they would still find her amazing. I don't kill puppies.
No.
But she could if she wanted to, with a smile.
That is true. And I guess the interesting thing, and probably a show topic for a later stage, is talking about high XP games.
Yeah.
And how, as a GM, you can run that and what sort of things you need to look out for.
Minion groups are made of nemesises.
Look, I still maintain that even with 1,000 XP, I can still throw 3 or 4 groups of stormtroopers at you and I'll still injure somebody. Because, hey, look, we were talking about this the other night, that Caitlin's got come close to 1,000 XP for a Vixto, but she's still only got 14 wounds. But anyway, we'll talk more about that as
opposed to a den with 26.
Yes, well, yes.
Bottom 20, 23 wounds, 20 strain.
Good Lord.
And soak 9.
But you know what? No one's going to shoot me because they're going to like me.
But yeah, that's a question that we'll get onto later on.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, though, perhaps we should be discussing some things on the internet.
You mean on the radar?
Yeah, that's the one. On the radar. And welcome to On the Radar, the segment where we will discuss the latest and greatest on the internet concerning the Genesis role-playing game and any other amazing discoveries that we feel may be of interest to our listeners. So, Michael, what have we got this week?
Well, let's get it out of the way, nice and early. I think everyone's probably seen it by now, but the Han Solo trailer.
Yeah, looking forward
I
to it.
cannot wait.
Clearly. I hope everyone had their sound up really loud because without headphones on,
That was intense.
where?
Yeah. No, I went from being, excited because it's a Star Wars film to insanely excited because it looks, from that trailer, it looks amazing. It looks like the Star Wars movie I've been waiting for, the underworld and the nitty-gritty sort of underbelly of the Star Wars universe, which we haven't really seen on screen.
No.
So it's going to be great to get that. And the music in that trailer.
Oh, that's what got me. I just love it.
I think they've done a really good job with the casting and showing. The other thing that's got me is the show, how they've shown the Millennium Falcon in its heyday.
Pristine.
Yeah.
How good is that shot that they had for the promo, which has got them sitting around Woody Harrelson, and Chewie and Lando and Han, just in the the chessboards, and oh my god, that was insane.
That's
I love it.
Yeah, amazing advertisement for cleaning products right there.
Bit of Ajax.
But yeah,
Ajax, bit of
spray
Jif.
and white.
Well, we now know why Princess Leia left Han, because he's got terrible hygiene.
Clearly.
That Falcon just goes downhill quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's only 10 years, something like that.
I think it's fair to say that's probably what most bachelor pads look like. So.
Needless to say, though, fantastic trailer. I love the pre-trailer trailer. So I can't wait until we see the movie, and that's not all that far away.
May.
That's like May.
Less than 100 days.
There's just so many Star Wars movies coming
that's
out.
Scary. And then we've got that. We've got Infinity War. We've got what's the other one?
Other
Deadpool.
films.
Deadpool.
All the same month. So it's
Cannot
going to be
wait.
pretty insane.
Yes.
That's one.
But anyway.
Yeah, one full month.
Yes. But yeah. So what else have we got, Martin?
We've got the Genesis character generator by Luke Olson. It's mobile friendly and it's available at genesisemporium.com.
That is so cool.
So it's a web-based form for you to be able to input all of your characters and
Yeah, Luke. Well, it's not just input; it's a full proper generator.
Yeah.
It's Luke's done an amazing job. It's not janky at all. He's just nailed it. It's just runs smoothly on your phone and your PC. You don't need to download anything. It's bam, ready to go. And obviously, it's not. You can't do everything like you can on a custom character sheet.
yeah.
But you can do 99% of it, and it's
Which is
fantastic. Yeah. So he's done a great job on that, and again, a perfect example of the community pitching in to do some really cool stuff for nothing. Which is great.
I can't wait to see what he does with that, with adding in your own content. But I'll be interested to see what further developments for that. I think it'll be good.
Yeah, because on Og Dudes you've got the data editor, and we don't sort of have that for this yet.
No, especially with Genesis being the way that it is, that you can go and develop new systems yourself with new skill lists and whatever else. So it'll be interesting to see somebody, add in the flexibility of the system into a program like that, because the program is fantastic, but it'll be interesting to see how things get done.
Because I'm looking at it here on my phone right now, and feel free to correct us if we're wrong, Luke, but I can't see how to add. I can't see any way to add custom skills or anything like that. There doesn't appear to be any blank spots, but I'm a bit of an old man when it comes to technology, so I could be wrong.
Not as old as some.
Well, Martin's not that old, but
Yay, I'm off the hook.
No, well, either way, he's done an amazing job so far. So good job,
Looks
Luke.
really
Good job.
Yeah, well done. Yeah. Caitlin, what else have we got?
There is actually a GM screen that has been fan made that you can find on Reddit underneath the Genesis tag for Reddit, but we'll also have a copy of that linked on our resources page on the dicepoolpodcast.com. So you'll be able to find it there. It is extremely detailed, and I know lots of people on the internet are wondering when FFG or if FFG is going to be releasing a branded GM screen. But for now, in the meantime, there's something that is currently available that has been put out there. So you can find it on our resources page and give it a check out. I also know that the author of that, which we'll also link, is interested in more feedback on it to really refine it. So I would recommend everyone to go and check it out, have a look, provide feedback, and then hopefully even some fan-made one can serve the purpose for a lot of the people out there.
No, it must be really hard for FFG to consider doing a GM screen for Genesis, because it's so it is just, it's not a rule set as such. All that it is just the framework. So you just, it's almost like when you create your setting, you have to create a GM screen as well.
There's still a lot of information that's relevant you put on that screen. There's a lot of crunch and tables and random bits and pieces you can chuck on there.
Yeah.
Which is at the core of the rules, I guess.
Yeah, for things like, the crit table is nice to have handy.
Yeah, true.
I always want these screens to have like the buy and sell rules, so negotiation, and streetwise. I love that sort of thing to be handy, because digging through a book for that is just
Some social combat stuff would be good too, because I know that's something that you don't really look up in the rules that often. So it's not often that's something that's that sharp in your mind. So to have it there on your screen, just even if it's a tables with the threat and advantage expenditure suggestions beyond the combat stuff, so the generic combat stuff, so that'd be good. But I guarantee when the Terranoth book drops, a screen probably
they'll have a
FFG
screen
for
for that.
Yeah. And as like a pretty newbie when it comes to knowing all the rules when it comes to RPG games, just even having simple things as like the difficulty and how they are related and how they can work like that. I know that's currently on the Star Wars one, and that's when I GM, like knowing how difficult to make a certain encounter or what the standard difficulty is for certain things is really helpful just to have as a quick reference.
Yep,
absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But keep an eye on that. And the one big thing, I guess, that is on the radar, which is not really Genesis related, but we don't hide by the fact that we're Star Wars fans in a big way. So on the horizon in the not too distant future, I guess it's just over a month away from when we're recording, is the Star Wars Legion, the miniatures war game, which finally has been announced as March 22nd. Which is being released. I know there's a few stores which have been doing like an early release playtest type thing that you can go to the store. I don't know of any in Australia, but I know that there have been. There's a whole list of them on the FFG website in the States.
There's a stack of YouTube channels as well, like Spiky Bits, Guerrilla Gaming and stuff like that. There's heaps of YouTube videos of people unboxing the models, playing intro games, awesome how to paint videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's an interesting situation this game's in, because it's sort of drawing a lot of people who have never played a proper legit miniatures game before, so they're completely new to painting models. So you got a lot of the X-Wing crowd and Firestorm Armada, and they're coming to the system where they have to build and paint. So there's a lot of people who are just asking what do we do? A lot of questions, like there's basic questions. So there's a lot of YouTube channels answering those, which is good, because people like myself who've been playing miniature games forever. It seems I think it's very common for to know how to do that sort of stuff. But again, when you look at it from someone looking in, it's interesting to see so many new people asking how to paint models and stuff like that. And it's a whole new demographic, a whole new market for them, I guess you could say. Of people. So
there was even a YouTube thing that I saw the other day, which was like 30-second how to paint stormtroopers.
Yeah, I saw that. That was good.
Which was
Use white.
No, basically you do it in like
and black.
You do it like a dark grey, and then you go over in a light grey, and you just very quickly dry brush it, and then you just go over it with a white, and then pretty much you're done. And
that's it.
They had an example of it. It was amazing.
I still like the meme that you can see on Facebook when it comes out, and it's got Star Wars colouring in books, and it's got like Kylo Ren. And you pretty much just colour in the red lightsaber. Okay, I'm done.
Yep. But yeah, the Star Wars Legion, super excited for it. I know I am, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what they do with it later on down the track. See how that goes. Michael, anything else on the radar?
All right, so what's next indeed? Well, we've got some new settings that have popped up on the internet, which is great. So we'll quickly go through those. We have Singularity. It looks to be a really fleshed out Mass Effect setting. That's done by a chap that goes by the name Singularity Mod X.
It's a group of them.
Oh, it's a group, is it?
Yeah.
That makes sense because that is a groupie sort of name. So yeah,
Yeah.
Singularity Mod X, and they base themselves on Reddit. And it's a really fantastic PDF. It's super fleshed out. You can tell a lot of love and care has gone into that because they quite clearly love the source material of Mass Effect.
As do we.
Yes, who shouldn't? That's amazing. I'm so
Absolutely.
excited for that one.
Absolutely. And there's another one, Edge of Tamriel, a work in progress Elder Scrolls setting by a chap called Calamity. Again, great looking work he's doing on that, and I'm sure that's going to appeal to a lot of people because I think Elder Scrolls is pretty popular.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think so. I think it's just a little bit popular. I think it's a bit of a niche market when it comes to, the role-playing universe. I mean, it's only fairly new.
Have you heard of that game called Skyrim?
I think it's ringing a bell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something it's completely nothing that I haven't spent majority of my youth and childhood. I wouldn't even say childhood. Let's just say I've spent a lot of my life in that world.
Hey, I started with Daggerfall.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're a Genesis player and you love the Elder Scrolls, then pick it up, and then obviously help Calamity write it by offering suggestions and feedback. I guess that's any writer likes. I like feedback. Then we have Primeval Fool, a sword and sorcery setting by Chris Holmes and Brian Euman. Now that's something pretty foreign to all of us, but we're not familiar with the setting. But going by, it looks like it's based off a 5th ed D&D
That's
setting.
what it sort of indicates. Yeah, there was a Kickstarter about it a little while ago, but it's certainly sort of, I think, just from reading what is out there in the net about it, it's very much a Conan type sort of feel to it, I think.
Yeah,
It looks very cool, and it's detailed enough that you're just like,
it's a
whoa.
it's a full
Yeah.
book. It's a full fleshed out PDF. You pick it up and you're ready to go. It doesn't look like it's work in progress at all. It's finalized and ready to play, which is cool. Then we have a Destiny setting based on the computer game of the same name by a guy called Bad Motherfucker.
You've got to be careful with that
Yeah,
name.
it's a tricky name, that one. So
He's a Banff.
So yeah, it's looking great as well. Hopefully it's not as grindy as the PC game, but that's neither here or there. And then there's a few work in progress ones which we've found
That we're really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to.
Absolutely. There's one for Dragon Ball Z. Again, I
big
think,
fan.
I think that's got a bit of a fan base, which should be pretty popular. with the kids.
Another niche market,
Another niche
very
market.
very
Niche.
small.
Yeah. Then there's Titanfall. Now that gets me very excited because I love the Titanfall series, and
Especially in this system.
yeah, the idea about jumping down to mechs during encounters as you're playing this and doing cool parkour things as you're running around your mech, shooting other people in the face, then jumping back into your mech to punch another mech in the face. That's got all the ticks in as far as I'm concerned. That's fantastic. There's another really interesting one called Mad Max in Mechs. Now,
That's not the name
well,
of it, but
it's
that
work-
is the setting.
working
Working title.
Yeah.
Yeah, working title.
Although
Because
you
we
made
have our own name for it, which we
yes,
think should be
Michael
going.
made a suggestion on their site, and I think it's absolutely amazing.
If he doesn't call it Mad Mex, MEX, then he's kidding himself because that's amazing. But it's his world. I don't want to tell him what to do around it, but do it.
Please.
Yes.
Very good. And Martin, what else have you found?
If you're going to be creating your own things for this Genesis game, you might want to take a look at the template guides put out by Guillaume Tardif.
Cool.
Now, he's put a lot of work into this, and there's a lot of templates for the various formatting that you might need to do to make it look like the book, and
sort of adversary cards and stuff like that as well. It looks great.
He has done a stellar job because it's not just one document; it's entire
there's folders
full of stuff, templates, bits and pieces. It's
anything you need.
and a big gold star to him because he's a champ.
Because it's also got the fonts and everything in there as well.
It's very comprehensive.
Very
is the word, I
comprehensive.
believe.
Yeah, very good. So, if you're looking at doing your own setting, jump into that quick because it'll give you a good start, if nothing else, which is great. And what else have we got, Caitlin?
So don't forget that March sees us introducing our very first special guest to the show. We're going to have RPG manager for Fantasy Flight Games, Sam Stewart, come along.
I am so excited.
Where we're going to have a bit of an interrogation with him, where all the questions from not only us as hosts, but also from you, the listeners. So make sure you get those questions about Genesis or RPGs or any of those types of things that you have in your mind that you would like someone who has effectively written the rule book for this type of world on either our Facebook with our dedicated thread, which has actually been pinned to the top of the page. So as soon as you go to our Facebook page, you will see it there. You can also get us your questions via Twitter, on the FFG message boards, via our website, www.thedicepoolpodcast.com, and also via email, which is info@thedicepoolpodcast.com.
Cool. And now for the most exciting part. I can't wait for this. I think it's time for Core of the Show.
Don't you mean... Oh.
Core of the Show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesis role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight we've got a really special episode where we're going to have a more of an informal chat and look at creating a unique setting through a roulette-style selection process. Now, this is going to be a fantastic way to show how you can customize Genesis, as well as an interesting way of combining different ideas all into one completely unique setting. So before we get fully started into talking about this mystery setting, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how this setting roulette is going to work?
Well, basically what we do, each of us, the hosts of the show, we've written up on a piece of paper 3 separate ideas. And they're pretty broad strokes. They could be anything you want, like zombies, earthquakes, volcanoes, whatever random idea we've had, we've chucked it down on paper. Each of us have 3 ideas. Now, the aim of it is basically we each randomly draw one of our own ideas. We don't know what it is. And then we combine all those random ideas into a bit of a boiling pot. And then with those 4 elements, we go ahead and create a unique setting using each of those things. So it could get pretty crazy and pretty wild. So to give you an idea, I did a bit of an example one up, just purely random thoughts we had prior to the show. The random words were night, western, sci-fi, alien. So we had a bit of a discussion about that, and like in 2 seconds we had pretty cool ideas. Like me and GM Flano were talking about nightly gunslingers and stuff like that in outer space on some sort of off-world Outlander style thing where they're fighting each other and alien creatures all at the same time. And that conversation took about 5 minutes, if that, and really had a cool sort of fundamental groundworks for an interesting setting. So basically what we're hoping tonight is in this episode, is to bring you an idea of what you could possibly do, even with you as the GM and your friends. You could sit down and really just brainstorm a really unique setting and then use the rules of the Genesis rulebook for outlining a setting to refine whatever you come up with. And basically that's what we're trying to do tonight.
Yep. So each of us prior to the show has written down 3 random ideas. So we're going to randomly select one of those 3 ideas each, or how are we going to do that?
I think it would be fun if we go around the table, and so for those listening at home, we're sitting around a table right now so that we have the 3 random ideas in our hand, and whoever is sitting next to us pulls it out of our hand for us, so it's a little bit more of a bit more fun.
Yep, absolutely.
A bit more random, and they can read it out as well.
And kind of go, what is going on in your mind?
And so once we've done that, then we'll obviously have the roundtable discussion of how we can combine all of these settings all together. And then after we've sort of formulated that into a pretty solid idea, what we'll do then is we have the Genesis setting sheet, which is available in the core rulebook. And we'll go in and sort of just roughly explain how we're going to fill that in. Sound good?
Yep. Sounds good.
Excellent. All right, so first what we'll do is, I think, as Caitlin has suggested, we'll go around the table. Martin, would you like to choose Michael's setting, please?
Oh, there's 3 to choose from. Make it random. Make it a good one.
Ooh, okay, so we are going to be hunting shadow creatures.
Ooh. That's interesting.
Already my brain is going a million miles an hour about what could be done with that.
That's right. Martin, your 3. Would you like to let Caitlin choose which one?
Here you go.
Okay. We are going to be hunting shadow creatures using magic.
Ooh, it works
okay.
already.
All right.
Ready? We've got a theme. It's getting there.
Caitlin,
Well, halfway there.
Caitlin, can I choose one of your three?
I suppose so.
Awesome.
Make it a good one.
I'll see what this is. And this one is Sky Blimp Battles.
Shadow blimps that come out of the realm. Like,
Wow.
I had
Excellent.
another really good one in here, but that's
All
okay.
right, Michael, for you.
oh, Ian, are they good ones?
Look.
You've seen the competition now.
Yeah, I'm
not too late to go back and
I'm
change.
scared. I'm
All
scared.
right, here we go. We are hunting shadow creatures with magic upon blimps whilst werewolves are about.
Oh,
So
This is
Interesting.
very they've worked together really well.
They have,
I
they're
had I had some less. Magic was the tamest choice out of all of them.
well, do we want to go around and talk about the other options we had?
I think that sounds like a good plan. Michael, would you like to start us off?
One of my options was a decaying earth.
Oh, okay. Martin.
I had relics of an ancient past.
I had necromorphs.
What on earth is a necromorph? Oh, dear.
So,
disturbing.
have you ever played the game Dead Space?
I have not.
Have you ever seen any still from Dead Space?
I'm probably going to lose all nerd cred here,
Okay.
and no.
I can help
Imagine two people died, combined themselves together, had spikes coming out of their body in various places, and their chest is coming apart, and they're coming after you and really violent with distended jaws.
And like
That's-
climbing
that's-
all over the walls and
That
stuff.
sounds very human centipede sort of stuff.
It-
much
kind
much
of.
worse.
Oh, yeah. So, human centipede, if they died in the process and then came back to life and they were trying to come after you
Wow.
whilst having spikes protruding from
That's
various
disturbing.
extremities. It's fantastic.
Okay.
It's one of my favouriteest games of all time. And I know that's not how you say favourite.
As Michael passes me his phone to show me that's
Did I do a good enough description?
a pretty good description.
Thank you.
I may need a bucket. It's all good. Okay.
Is that for the drool of how awesome that idea
no,
is?
definitely not. All right, so one of my options that I had was 1 in every 4 people can see into the future.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Oh, I didn't see that
I
coming.
feel ashamed.
I see what you did there.
I feel a bit ashamed. My ideas were pretty tame compared to that.
My last option that wasn't picked was Mecca.
Oh.
I chose pirates as my last idea.
Yes.
So.
Caitlin?
I had mutated beasts, half one breed, half another.
And mine was a world without an ocean.
That'd be a bit dry if you ask me.
So good.
I was like,
That's
so
great.
it's like, so you can't, there would be no islands or anything.
No, it wouldn't be. That it's sort of, I guess it's kind of a bit of it, like a Tatooine or a Jakku or something like that. But yeah, I was just thinking,
Or-
what would happen if there was no ocean whatsoever?
It's all artisanal water or whatever it is, the artesian, water
Well, could
underground.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if we had that with
Decaying Earth, yeah,
It
when
would
you
be
read
Earth,
that out.
no oceans left.
Wow.
Interesting.
Oh, we'll
All
keep
right.
this aside. We can use them later on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But what
Or,
we've got-
hey, look, our listeners can use it at home and do this exercise themselves. Pick one of our choices, or
Absolutely.
pick 4 of our choices.
You know I'm going to be putting necromorphs in every single one of these that we do.
Until it gets picked.
Damn right.
All right. So, just for summary, the 4 choices that we have are.
So, our 4 choices are hunting shadow creatures in sky blimp battles, using magic, and also werewolves are about.
All right. So that's our mixing pot of ideas, basically. So we have to sit down and create a cool setting using those 4 elements.
Right.
To me, this screams of, like steampunk
Yeah.
Absolutely.
combined, with the whole mythos idea. Once again, the shadow creatures coming from another dimension or something.
So I have this view that the heroes are actually the werewolves fighting the shadow creatures, or perhaps it's even the other way around. But whoever is in those sky blimps, they're the werewolves, kind of thing.
Maybe there's like a nation of werewolves.
Yeah.
They are their own
Well,
culture.
I had a very similar idea to that. Perhaps the humanity or whatever the main culture is employs mercenary werewolves types to help hunt the shadow creatures because they're the only ones who possess the magical means to actually destroy a shadow creature.
Oh, kind of like dog soldiers type thing.
Well,
Yeah.
they have a
Yeah.
so the shadow creatures can only be destroyed by magic. and most humans don't have the talent for it or the ability to access that. So all werewolves are inherently magical.
Like it. And I can imagine, because if everyone's a werewolf, I can imagine then you'd also have different types of werewolves. Like you'd have big burly ones, then agile, nimble ones, they're almost like cat-like in a way. Then you can have your more wise wolf, wise grey wolf types who are your magic casters and whatnot. So you can have all these different sub-races of werewolves all mashed together in one genre. So it'd be interesting. And do they have a human form, or are they always constantly like a werewolf?
There's got to be a human form. And I think that there has to be an option as well to play the rare human that is magically attenuated or whatever. And
bit of a throwback type thing to years gone past during medieval times
but
and
they
things
work
like that.
alongside the werewolves because they are, they're capable of doing this work as well.
Well, how about the humans are the ones who actually operate and maintain the airships? So you have these humans who fly the airships, the captains, the pilots, the seers, or whatever that means they need to require to fly these airships, these blimps. But then the soldiers, the ones who launch off the decks of the ship, are the werewolves. So you can have this two blend of archetypes working together seamlessly. One isn't magical, but they're still vital because they're the only ones who have the control and dexterity to keep control. Then the know-how to operate these airships.
Yeah, so most of them are not going to be magical, but is there still going to be the rare human that could be
I think
magical?
so, absolutely.
Could we say that, or firstly, I guess it's a question with the airships. Are they steam powered or are they magically powered?
I've always had a bit of a soft spot for like Spelljammer type stuff.
Yeah.
Where the person sort of plugs into the ship by magical means and becomes an extension to their body, or like it tunes to it. Like it's a magical extension. Like any other magic item.
So
it resonates with them.
It works on a scientific principle. It floats in the air because of helium or not helium, hydrogen or whatever it is that they fill the balloon with. But it's operated through a magical interface.
Exactly, yes.
Because there's the other side of it, and like a view that I have in terms of like a really epic scene that could happen is that you have a human on one blimp and they're coming across to another one, and you see him start running, and then halfway through as he leaps onto the other ship, that's when he turns into a werewolf, and you can just see his claws jumping, like digging into the floaty part. I wrote space blimp battles. I don't know what they're made out of, but let's just call it the big bubble. And the big bubble, and he's like claws and scratching down on them. And because we are dealing with, it would make sense if the ships themselves were powered and operated through magical means, so that it wasn't so easy to take them down just by like popping the balloon.
They've got protections and things that I imagine like as he claws
It like
through,
stitches.
it like stitches back.
Yes.
The guy piloting the blimp, the navigator, whatever you call it, as the scratches go down the side of the blimp, he gets the scratches down his back.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
So that would mean that type of character, that archetype, would have to have a pretty high wound threshold as well as a bit of a strain, like an equal one there, because they'd have to be able to deal with not only undertaking ship strain as their own, which, as we all know, Star Wars does have that talent and those abilities, so that could be inherent in those types of people who plug into the ship. There is a talent that they get as part of that archetype to be able to maneuver the ship and actually undertake some of that strain for it too.
Make a werewolf the best pilot for the ship because they regenerate?
They regenerate, maybe.
True, but maybe I like the idea of the distinction of the two. So the werewolves are your warrior types,
warriors,
and then your vulnerability is the fact that humans have to pilot the ship because werewolves they're constantly in an agitated state.
Yes,
they can't focus.
Yeah,
they don't have that discipline to be able to take control of the entirety of the ship and how it runs.
Their rage is always bubbling under the surface.
That's right.
For a background as well, so we've talked a little bit, but just in terms of like, how did we get to this point of fighting these creatures or fighting these things? I had I just in the brainwave, because this is all completely off the fly. We haven't prepared any of this either. So just so you know, like this is all just us spitballing. But how cool would it be if this is kind of set in the future, but in a future where werewolves actually triumphed over vampires and took control of the human race?
Ooh, that's cool.
And the shadow creatures are actually something that the vampires were trying to create in order to take out the werewolves, but they didn't live to see their creation come to life, and now the werewolves are trying to hold their ground.
They're the tortured spectres of the remnants of those vampires.
So because they never died.
Humanity. They never really died. Just their physical form.
Yeah, that's
you
cool.
mentioned this was in your idea, Caitlin. You said it was space blimp battles.
No, sky blimp.
Oh, it's just
because I just for some reason when we started thinking about these ideas, I thought of a steampunk blimp in these like dark grey clouds with lightning going around, and then people fighting across them and things. And I was also thinking of a few of my favorite animes while I had that.
Yeah. That to me says more not medieval, but sort of that 1800s. Sort of 1899 type sort of scenario.
It can be modern day, but what's happened is that the werewolves are the ones that destroyed the vampires, and they had that secret war behind the scenes. But the result is that now there's these shadow creatures assaulting humanity, and this is the remnants. This is the last nation.
Yeah.
Well, I have an idea which is similar to that. Perhaps the Earth or whatever world this is set on, during this giant war between the vampires and the werewolves, the vampires realised they weren't going to win this fight. So what they did, for whatever means, they fractured the planet. So the planet was completely shattered, but still self-contained by its gravity well. So imagine a half-exploded, shattered sphere, but it's all contained in an atmosphere
The
still.
crust of the Earth is like cracked, and there are like plateaus of the planet.
Floating chunks of Earth and continent. And what the shadow is, it's the corrupt core of the planet. It's been turned into this, whatever the vampires have created. So the inner core of this, whatever's left of this world, is seeping out, and that's where the evil comes from.
Vampires are always after ultimate darkness, so that they can walk effectively in the daylight, and the way to do that would obviously be to have some sort of magical effect that, once it was released into the atmosphere, left the world completely in this constant shadow.
It's just mist everywhere.
But when things went wrong, and because they were controlling it, because they were going to be able to focus that energy when it's getting released from the shadow realm or whatever else, when the werewolves took control and they wiped out all of the vampires, nobody sort of had their finger on the release valve. And consequently, that just built up within the core, and then that's what's cracked the planet.
So an infusion of evil
I like the idea of the cracked planet.
Just fractured mass floating in space.
Yeah.
And that's why there's blimps to move from each fractured element to the other.
Yeah.
So that comes to the question, if there's black ethereal stuff for the vampires, whatever that might be, why do they have airships? That's a big question. I have this awesome image of like a werewolf airship sort of slowly moving its way through the clouds, and
because we are talking sky battles.
We see this image of this ship moving slowly. The crew are sort of watching out for would-be attackers, and all of a sudden, out of the mist comes this massive, like vampiric airship with all this black smoke trailing behind it.
We sort of moved on from the vampires, right? Being the shadow creatures themselves, but what if? Because it is the darkness coming from the center of the earth, whatever the artifact or the thing that they were playing with. But what if their souls then were enslaved by this? And so they are the ones that are piloting the ships, as you say. But they're not, they're shadows of their former selves. They're thralls now rather than the lords of darkness that they once were.
So the crews are like these wretched souls, essentially.
Exactly.
And the ships are half ethereal but half not, and they're all very inky
they're
and
a mimicry
shadowy
of life.
Yep, that's cool.
They're kind of almost like a zombie type sort of
More
feel to
intelligent,
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, because they're enthralled, a lot of their edge has been lost. But they're much more dangerous because they cannot be killed.
Exactly. I imagine it'd be like some of the foot troops they have could be these creatures that phase in and out of the shadows. Like it appears in the smoke when these scything blades and whatnot slash and tack on top of the airships. The next minute it just disappears into the smoke and reappears somewhere else.
When the planet cracked, all of the nations of the Earth were split across all of these different continental shelves floating around the core. But they couldn't, obviously, most of the nations were not prepared for this.
I think they were wiped out. Nations prepared for that.
they were wiped out in moments. And so, there's a few different settlement, or city-states, effectively, on different shelves. And so they've got to move around and try and work together. But this is the organized defense, is these, blimps.
I think as well, when we're looking at a setting, there needs to be not only just a fight for, their lives or fight for the world or fight humanity. I like the idea of there also being a drive to fight for resources, or how are you going to build all these things? If we've got a cracked earth, there's no growing any wood. How are you going to create things?
Running out of water.
What about energy? We don't have the sun anymore. So your basic level of getting energy is completely gone. So I had this thought of perhaps, and part of the reason why we had to go to the clouds is that as the world split apart, and as energy that we didn't even know existed within the Earth's core, or that was created by the vampires when they were essentially putting in their very essence of whatever there is to rupture the Earth, what that could have released into the atmosphere and into the clouds is almost like the lightning itself is energy, and you have to collect and you have to harness the energy of the lightning that's around you. So I imagine like having, if anyone's seen Stardust, Stardust, they collect and basically farm and fish for lightning in order to power their ships, power their societies, or anything like that. So when the shadow creatures do come out, and they do come out to come and attack the ships, it's attacking the ships that are collecting the energy that is keeping these organizations running and going. So it's almost like, you know, the deep sea trawlers and having to fight the elements, but they're also the elements are attacking back.
That could almost be like a campaign element of the story that you're telling, that you've got a trawler crew that are retired soldiers, somebody who has left the service due to an accident or something like that, who was in charge of running one of these blimps, who's now taken on the role of using an old trawler.
I think that these nations as well don't always get along.
No,
They fight for these resources.
Well, you've got werewolves who originally wanted to overthrow humanity, but now they're forced to work with humanity. So there's this forced animosity. They have to live with each other because they both codepend. Because
they need them.
The werewolves need the humans to
for the ships,
manipulate technology essentially. And vice versa. The humans need the werewolves to defend them from the blackness.
And I think with the idea of the lightning and being something that is like a mineral or a resource or something that is valuable to not only the werewolves and the humans but also the shadow walkers, is because that's almost an element of them. And whenever they are shadow creatures, when they come into contact with weapons that have been infused with the lightning, that's when they become solid and they can actually be attacked. And so if you're a human, from the sounds of what we're having a chat about, there's not really much that you could potentially do with shadow creatures coming in and out of the sand. But if you have for some reason, I have a staff in my mind and it's got lightning cracking on the end of it, and every single time you move it, it's just got these light.
That's cool.
Or Martin comes up with the correct terminology. That's okay. Someone understands my madness, and I appreciate that. But they have that, and then you can see them and it's almost like you can, as like when they're going through and swinging at whatever is this shadow creature, like that's when it collides, and then you can see the lightning come across the point where it hits the shadow creature. But any other weapon, not so effective.
You know what you could have as well? Flintlock weapons like muskets, right? But instead of loading with lead balls, they're loaded with like condensed lightning balls.
Oh,
so
it's like bottled lightning.
Shoots like this crackling arc of like.
So, my question
amazing.
then is, why do they need the werewolves if they've got these weapons?
I guess the werewolves. At the end of the day, the werewolves would be there.
The werewolves are the only ones that can kill them, though.
True.
Correct.
The other thing
hurt them, but yes,
it's almost as if like. The one thing that they didn't count on, because you know how all those stories are fantastic when aliens come to Earth, and the one thing they didn't count on is the common cold that'll wipe them all out. But the one thing that the werewolves have going for them is perhaps maybe something that's in their saliva or in their blood. That's almost like something that as soon as it kind of
maybe they're half ethereal themselves. They're half in the mortal realm, half in the magic realm, for more or less better terms. But those two elements make them the perfect killing machine to hunt these shadow monsters because they can phase into their reality naturally and hurt these things.
It's part of how they do their
exactly.
change.
It's just normal to them.
The other thing that you could throw into the mix as well is that humanity is on the brink of just being completely and utterly extinct.
Pretty much.
So there are only a few humans that are left in comparison to the werewolves, because during the war, obviously, the werewolves have been trying to gather their own forces, increase their own numbers, and so they've just gone out, and attacked everyone. But there's this small remnant of humanity which has been left behind.
And now they need to nurse them.
And that's the reason why that, as far as soldiers and, just all the grunt work, that's all done by the werewolves. And you can even then go into to have almost like this warrior culture, I guess, to use Star Trek, I guess, you can almost have a Klingon type sort of feel to
The werewolves.
to the werewolves themselves.
Code of honor and violence being the call of the day.
And stuff like that.
And you could have your old school sort of werewolves who they hate humans.
Yeah.
They're the old,
Absolutely.
grizzled ones, and they've been around since the original war.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're the dying generation, essentially. Well, as much as a werewolf can die.
Yeah.
But I think there has to be some element of animosity still there.
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
definitely.
Character
Absolutely.
class where they respect humans, but at the same time, they disdain humans because...
They're weak and small.
Exactly. But they hate the fact that they're so dependent on these fleshy pink creatures.
Yeah.
And another thing that just a small element that came to mind before is that I pictured there being like a floating city,
Yeah.
which is sort of powered by the magic, same sort of magic as is used for the airships, but it's just above the clouds. So, maybe the darkness has not reached the higher levels of the atmosphere.
Well, it
And so they've-
can't because that above the clouds is where the light is.
That's right. So what you have is this city, and that could be, the remnants of Washington or whatever else, that is just sitting in the clouds, and it's right on the cusp.
Yep.
I think you mean Brisbane.
Sure.
That's not much of a floating city.
But if you have it just sitting on the cusp of the darkness, and he would call it Night's Edge.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that name.
Yes.
Yeah.
I imagine
So-
it's...
You're just like, I know.
Well, it's what humanity did to at the very end when it's all happened. They've
Yep.
done that because they
Well-
knew it would be their only safe haven.
Well,
Yeah.
I like the
Yeah.
idea though of there being these other floating cities, like the other continents, if you will,
Yeah.
and they're still, they don't necessarily all get along because they're all still vying for resources. So you
Yeah.
have this, you still have very much a civil war going on between the human/werewolves above the clouds.
yeah.
Yep.
So that could be a big, part of it as well. Like the campaign action obviously takes place in the depths of the darkness where the fractured earth is, in and out of the ruined rocks that are floating around. However, you could, if you wanted to, expand to a very political campaign above the clouds and with the events
Yeah.
below fueling
I think
whatever goes on above.
So we've got a few cities that have raised themselves up to the top. But I
You
think
do your big powers like Russia, China, your big mainstays,
I think
and
that-
have each of their own flavour.
those are just cities, right? And down below, you do still have people living
Oh,
there.
yeah, for sure.
On,
yeah.
on the
For sure.
surface.
Yeah.
But I do have to ask, what keeps all of this together? Because there's a gravity well that keeps all of this here, but what keeps... Because there has to be an atmosphere. So is this an artifact of the power of the darkness?
This is the thing. Like I was thinking, this could be. I think it would be easier in terms of developing the hows if you establish this not on Earth and you do it on a magical world.
Magical word.
Magical world. This could be very similar. It could still be Victorian steampunk. It's just not Earth, and there's magic binding it all. Still, it's keeping the atmosphere together.
Yep.
And that could be the target of the darkness, to find these grand priests or wizards or whoever's still keeping this this place bound together, because it's the last cage this darkness needs to get out.
No, they're on the cities.
Exactly. Each city
Right?
has their
Because
own.
they can't reach the cities, but the cities are floating. To get that high, they need to be powered by the lightning,
Exactly.
which they've got to go down into
Down
the
into-
clouds
yeah.
to get.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
that's why the darkness fights so hard to prevent them from collecting this resource. Because if they fail, the cities will fall.
slowly
below
decay,
that. Below that.
And they'll attack them.
I
Yeah.
love that.
And there could be great cities who have fallen. It could be
Oh,
recent history,
so many.
or even just one. It could be in very recent history. And that's like that's the call to action to almost
Yeah.
everyone to start getting along, because they realize if they keep acting as fractured states, the darkness will eventually win.
That's so hard.
Because
It's great. It's fantastic.
you could have characters that have just managed to jump ship, so to speak, before the city had fallen. You could have
Oh, yeah.
characters
Yep.
that had family members that were on there. You could have characters that didn't even know it happened because they're so up and like I would imagine there would be high society in these cities as well, so you would have those types of characters. Like there's lots of room for that. And when you look at,
Very recent.
I'm going to go to some of my favorite bits. When you look at Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, the original RPG, when Terrace was destroyed, as a player, you were going around and talking to all the different people, and you'd have some people go, "Did you hear Taris had destroyed?" Or you'd meet people who had family on Taris, and you'd have like those different types of interactions. So as a GM, you already have a really rich resource right there with what we've just spoken about and how you can create a campaign.
Absolutely.
But I have another question.
Oh.
We need a big bad.
We do.
I have an idea for a potential big bad, or it could be a part of the big bad. There's a part on the Earth called the Maw. It's where the magical element that's contained in the atmosphere is actually fractured, and there's all the darkness has been pulled out into the vacuum of space, and that's where, and all the energy is being pulled out through there. So the energy, the lightning, is this dying resource as well, and that Maw, the enclosing it up by whatever magical means, has been prevented by a big bad.
I like that. I also like the idea that, because story is really, really cool. I like the idea that in order for whatever it is to be destroyed, it actually does require all the cities at various strategic points around the whatever is left of the globe, essentially, in order to destroy whatever it is. And that's what is causing some unrest, is that one of the cities have fallen.
And that's created the Maw, because there's a chink in the armor, essentially.
Yep. They then need to figure out how they're going to work together, how they're going to cast a net or cast a beam at various different weak points, how they're going to find out what those weak points are, all those different things, just to try and have that final
showdown.
Yes, thank you.
I like to think that at least one of the city-states is in a state of disbelief. They still deny the fact that the lightning is dying and that this resource is going to disappear. Yeah. They're probably like a high society type city.
The Earth is still there and it's flat.
Yeah.
No.
Or they don't believe Australia exists.
It's like, what, it's fine. The Earth is just a little bit hot. Global, climate change isn't a thing.
But we don't need to get political, but I think that, yes, they don't, even with that city falling, they don't believe that this is actually a threat to them. It'll,
so coaxing them to help could be a large part of it.
It's a big barrier to what we need to achieve.
As for the fallen city, just an idea. Maybe it isn't destroyed. Maybe it's just sunk into the clouds and has fallen into the shadow realm. So they because
there's still people down there.
Well, so then they've all been overcome by the shadowy, vampiric, or whatever it is. They all become enthralled themselves,
like like the original vampires.
But the original means to keep the force field that keeps the atmosphere together, binding everything, it still exists on this sunken city-state. So it's a matter of all the nations launching a...
They've got to raise it up again.
Got to raise it up, like raising the Titanic. Essentially, they've got to. It's this perilous, almost impossible task, but they know it's the only thing they can do to start conquering this darkness, which will eventually overcome.
So the big bad then is perhaps the shade of the original vampire.
Exactly. Ooh, yes.
Yep.
Perhaps it's the inner core of the earth. It's not a person as such.
Well, he's molded himself to that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So he's like everything that's
confused.
It's the form of the original vampire.
Yes.
And it takes his persona, but it's really the core.
This big black seething mass with tendrils oozing out.
I imagine that the shape of the original vampire is like within that black Earth's core, and you can see him kind of splayed out in the middle of it too, and it's kind of like he's trapped for all eternity in there, and that's part of the reason why he wants to destroy it all, because he's done. He's ready. He wants it to be over.
He wants to move on.
Yeah.
So he's
had enough
after
time.
destruction
Yeah.
for his pain and his suffering to be over.
Well,
exactly.
Okay. Well, I sort of imagine him coming out to do battle sometimes. Is he able to do that?
Well, I was imagine maybe similar to what Caitlin's idea was. This dude is still there physically in some way, shape, or form, but going back and visiting those vampire tropes, which we haven't really touched upon. Perhaps his original sarcophagus is floating there in the core of the earth.
Oh.
And he's still sleeping, he slumbers in it. This big stone coffin, essentially, and he comes out when he needs to get the job done.
And it could also be, it's so standard that there is one original vampire and one original werewolf. So perhaps the king of whoever is looking after that is that original werewolf, and that he's got tufts of hair missing, and he's kind of he can never really change back to being a human because he's just been a werewolf for so long that that is his constant state, but he is royalty and he is treated as such, and so he's not wanting to keep that original vampire coming out, and the original vampire wants to come out, and but he's probably like in the control of a lot of those aspects as well, but he's also one that's never seen. So there's rumors going around that perhaps...
So there's lots of talk about him. But,
and there's pictures of him and people describe what he looks like and all that kind of stuff, but no one's ever seen him in a really long time, and no one knows why.
That is awesome, because you say he can't transform back to being in a humanoid state. And because he can't do it, for whatever reason, whatever magical bond he shares to all the other werewolves, their bloodline, none of the rest of the werewolves can transform back into a humanoid state. And that's why they depend on the humans so much, because whilst in the werewolf state, they lack the physical control and agitate. They have too much agitation.
This only came about when, and they've got wolf hands.
Exactly, that too. But they're just physically mad and enraged.
This
all the
only
time.
came about when the Earth shattered.
Exactly.
Exactly. They don't know why.
Yep. So for them, it's their goal to find the original and go, why aren't you?
Well, he's still around.
Exactly.
He's still
it's their agenda. It's their agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also have this idea of because we all, with every society and with every, you have your military, you have your high society, you have your lower class, and you also have your little bit of scum and villainy and
the best part of any setting.
Yes. And I had this idea that they've actually created this little underworld by combining some of the floating rocks together through bridges and through structures, so that, for each of the little rocks they have bars and clubs.
Kind of like a Shadowport type thing.
But it's
Tortuga.
But it's like all weirdly, it's just a whole bunch of rocks that just happen to be close together, and they've combined it with all these weird looking structures, and it's just all everywhere.
Yeah.
We'll throw an idea at you using your idea, and I think you're gonna love it.
Well, you do know me pretty well.
It's a combination of all these rocks and bits and pieces, all tethered together by structures and bridges and whatnot. But when you look at it from the outside, from afar, it's its own spherical mass. So it's almost its own world inside the cloud mass, and it's like because
it's not all the way down into the darkness,
it's somewhere in the middle, in the sort of area. But it actually forms almost a planet in its own little, like a little moon essentially.
And that's no moon.
And you get closer to it, you realize it's all fractured and cracked, and none of it's whole. It's just completely bound together by buildings, bridges, tethers, pipework, you name it. It's all slapped together.
Pirate blimps go there.
Yes. They float in and out of the cracks in the big ports.
Because it's a shadow port.
I see that as part of it still being in above the sunlight line, so that you've still got your aristocratic pirates that still live sort of like their brethren who live in the higher cities. But instead they're sort of they're the leaders of the pirate they're the pirate kings for one of the
What about a rotation? Yeah, I was just going to say a rotation. So similar to Chronicles of Riddick, where they would pop the top and they would get some sunlight when they're at the top there. So the people who work there could get some sunlight, whereas the people down below don't. But they could have that where they go, okay, it's it's time to go up, and it's just a little cycle where it's almost like there's no rules, and so they're actually able to come up like a purge or something like that, where there's and they're allowed to come up, and the aristocrats can come down and enjoy high society, and then it drops, and all of a sudden in the middle of it's like a constant nightclub.
Also, who's the leader of Shadowport? Someone, I think I'm picturing this almost twisted Lando type from Star Wars, but he's a human who's made a pact with the vampires.
Yes.
So he's half human, half shadow creature.
Part of the reason why it's called Shadowport.
Exactly. And he's got his own agenda. He doesn't care for anyone's agenda but his own profit.
Yeah.
And he knows people will come here for a black market. Exactly.
And the other thing is that all the people that tend to go there are the humans who were living on the surface and not doing very well, and managed to find their way up in slavery or whatever that might be.
It floats to the top every now and often, so they flock to it when it does.
Exactly. But then the other side of it is that I imagine that there's a whole bunch of werewolves as well who have been kicked out of their pack, and with all that dog culture, if they're not in a pack, then who are they? The lone wolf doesn't survive long on its own. The whole power of werewolves and having the canine mentality is the pack.
Yep.
So you have a whole bunch of lone wolves going and flocking together to find somewhere to find their own little pack, but necessarily not still working together in that same way. But there's still that power in numbers within that little mini society within the bigger world that we're talking about.
So you could have like werewolf pirates.
Yes.
Is that the best thing in the world?
And that's why they fall so easily.
Yep.
And sorry, Ian, you were saying something before about, and when it gets up to the like, there's a top part.
What I was thinking, picturing at the top, is that they have these almost like domes. They're like a crystal dome, and that's where they grow their fruits and whatever else, their agriculture. Yeah. And so when it reaches that stage, they have werewolves or whoever it is that have to, use the turbines or whatever else to open these big things so that they
have to be humans.
They can have to be humans, so that all of these, all of the sunlight can basically touch, and because the type of agriculture that they're having is going to be a little bit different. Because it only gets 2 hours worth of sunlight a day,
magic.
Rather than it's some sort of, it had to be enhanced with magic and whatever else. So you could almost have a type of a career or whatever else that's all that they look after. So they're like your herbologists who have to mix with, we might call it, they use magic, but it's almost like mixing with the DNA to enable the plants to be able to survive just for that short period of time.
I absolutely love that idea, and part of the reason I love that is I have this view that the corrupted Lando type character who runs it, the reason why he has that technology and why he has permission effectively to have this cesspool come up above the clouds and down above the clouds is that he's paid a lot of money to make sure that he is the only person who has that technology. So whilst he's made a pact with effectively the devil, he also has bargaining with the highfalutin with the city states.
Yeah.
So he is needed by both in a variety of different ways, but is almost playing both sides. So he has the happy people at the top, and he has he's safe down below.
His Shadowport moves around.
Yeah.
So it moves from city state to city state. It just floats about beneath the clouds.
It's almost like trades with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then that's
when he's not raiding them.
Exactly. Oh, that too. And the Paragons who do want to stop his actions can never find him because he's always on the move.
Well, most of the time they pay them off, like to not raid them.
I mean, the pure holy Paragons who are like, Paragons are good, who just can't be bribed or sold or whatever. They want to try and track him down like an inquisitorial order, essentially. And they can never find him. He's always on the move. He's always protected. And if they do find him, he has a whole army of werewolf pirates he can just send out to defend. He's got this ultimate power over everyone in a way.
Yeah.
And he's also the go-to person for any of your type of exotics that have been different types of weapon. Well, not him, but that place. If you want to get custom-made weapons with the electricity that have been harvested by the pirates that are there, but also the high society like to use him because he has the werewolf pirates that will go out and undertake different types of bounties and almost be like their own little privateers.
Yep.
So not only is he getting money through trade from there, he's getting income from the high people through privateering, that for each of the different types of colonies that are out there as well. He's like his own little, Switzerland between the two worlds.
Yeah.
I have another idea. I'm going to throw it into the mix because I think it's pretty cool going with it. Because if we stepped away from Earth and we go from a more magical field to a shattered magical world, perhaps a bit of a remnant from the times gone, there was portals between each city.
Okay.
However, to get to the portals requires a massive amount of energy. To open a portal, like it consumes months worth of energy.
Yeah.
So in a crisis, they can move VIPs or delegates or whoever between cities, no worries at all. However, there's also lost portals everywhere under the clouds.
Yes.
In whatever remnants of the earth that was. So the darkness is using these portals. They can come through, or the werewolf pirates or the werewolf hunters or whoever might have old maps that interlink all these portals across the world.
Yeah.
And to use these portals requires canisters of energy which have to be screwed into receivers essentially and draw the power. Like cost thousands of gold in whatever the equivalent currency is to power one of these gates. And however, Lando, our corrupted Lando man, has his own gates in the shadow
Yeah.
port.
Yeah, which is recovered from down below.
And because he lives so close to effectively the clouds that have this special kind of lightning that's magical in its own sense, like he has no shortage of resources to power these portals. And also why that land is why that space is so dangerous, because the portals effectively, lightning strikes the portal and it's charged.
Yep.
So that's also how the shadow people are traveling between the portals down
doesn't
below.
cost them anything.
It's just the portals that are inside the clouds is what's active.
You know what keeps him in ultimate power? This Lando type? People,
I don't know. Please tell me.
People travel to his
Anticipation.
People travel to his shadow port, right? Like high delegates from above,
Yep.
just to use his free portals. Well, they're not free.
Right.
He charges a lot.
Yeah.
But
But
it doesn't
it's
cost them
less.
any energy.
Yeah.
So people want to travel to one continent. He's a bit of a halfway point. Just to cut a 10-day
risk
journey
involved.
down to a couple of days, because he might be the closest port. They travel there. They pay an insane fee to use his gate. He's like, sure, no worries. I'll teleport you over to here. He does it for him. But if it's someone he doesn't like, you know what he does? Teleports him deep into the shadow realm.
Oh. Like
I'd
I
say-
imagine an angry moment with someone who's crossed him, and
Yeah.
he's in his room and he's like drinking some form of like alcohol or something like that, and he's super angry, and he's obviously been double crossed, and so he just walks over to him and does like a whole this is Sparta kick of this guy into this portal, and then you just see him drop down into the ground and then just being taken over by like
Those
black
hands
tar,
come out.
like
Yeah.
black tar that's like hands and tendrils all
Yep.
coming, and him just seeing like his eye like
And I just imagine though that no one actually knows. Like, there's no proof that this has ever happened. But
His portals?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, where he's kicked them. To,
Oh, absolutely. Because they don't come back.
They don't come back. No, it's the perfect crime.
Yeah.
Except there are rumors that it has happened, and everyone always talks about
and
it.
portal technology has been, notoriously unstable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So accidents happen. It's unfortunate.
One of the things that I thought about, because I love Shakespeare, is you could certainly have your Romeo and Juliet type thing where you've got werewolf families and human families.
Yep.
That using these portals type thing, and the only thing that you can do is go to the shadow port to use their portals to bring these two, and you're sort of the characters are employed to take these two star-crossed lovers between the different areas, and so you can have all this political intrigue that's going on in the background between these two warring families. That where one's sort of a werewolf clan and the other one's this aristocratic nobles who are just running the show on one of the floating cities.
Yeah.
I think that'd be kind of cool.
So much you can do there.
so far in just the few minutes that we've been chatting, this is what
I think
happens.
we need to stop before we get-
we get an idea. Well, not necessarily. I don't want to stop. I just want to just take stock of actually what we've
Yep.
created.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we have effectively a whole bunch of different settings within this one larger setting that we've created. We've got a political setting that we could potentially do. We have the underground setting, like if you're wanting to run campaigns, you can do it in the underground. The political side, you could do it in the warfare side. So the military thing, you could do the magic type of side. So it's almost like we've covered a lot of those different bases depending on the type of characters that you want to create, the stories you want to tell, any of that kind of stuff. You could even just have a really simple underground scoundrel type story that's just based on people going and trying to survive while collecting lightning.
Yeah.
You don't even have to deal with the big bad, but you might have a magic users that do all these different types of things.
Well, heck, you don't even need to be on the blimps. You could be treasure hunters who use the portals, and you just move from Shadow Dungeon to
down in the
Shadowlands, these ruined cities and
Adventurers.
whatnot. Adventurers, you don't even need the blimps. You're employed by the Lando type.
Yeah. I think we have our setting now.
Yeah.
We have a
Should
big
we
ticks everywhere. I think
Should we write it down?
we should.
I think this is a good plan, because this is kind of when you sort of sit around. I just want to touch base on the fact that what we've done is not something which is really new. What we've done is something that writers do all the time. I know that in our writing course that we do, that we throw random words at each other until we've got a list of words, and then we try to put a story together. Effectively, that's kind of what we're doing. And what we've done is we've asked questions as we've progressed through what we've assembled so that we can get a consistent idea and so that we can answer those questions, because those sorts of questions are going to be asked by players anyway. And, you know, this is the sort of setting that your players can really feel invested in, because they're, as part of the, you know, the pre-session zero, I guess, is that you as a player are getting the front row seat on how this world is constructed. And I think that you'll get a lot more buy-in from players if you have that type of setting. And that's something to take away from this.
Well, especially if they're contributing ideas to this setting, they're definitely going to be invested.
That's right.
This is the perfect example. You know, if you have a group of mates who play role play
all the time,
and you go, hey, we've got a free weekend, let's have a role playing weekend.
Yep.
Sit down Friday night, you do this as a group, and you brainstorm an epic setting. Then you write this down on your Genesis setting sheet.
Yep.
Define it. Saturday night comes along, bam, you play it.
Yeah.
It's fresh in your mind. Everyone's keen. Everyone's good to go. Everyone's keen and good to go because everyone's contributed to the idea for the setting.
Yep.
And it's a great example to GMs out there. You don't have to create the settings all by yourself. Let your players contribute, because you see it time and time again when you're actually playing on the table. When the players contribute to scenes and dice rolls and whatnot by adding to the narrative, it makes massive cool things happen.
Yep.
Imagine doing that into a setting as well. Like, as you can see here, we had no idea what we're going into, but we've immediately created this world where we all want to play in it.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's also interesting as well when you have a bit of a think tank and a group think. Just because you have one idea that you think is really cool, another player will take it and take it to another level that could be even better than you even thought possible. Like, as a GM, you don't always have to feel that you have to have the answer for everything. Allow your players to have that freedom to help you guide that story, to help you guide that setting, so that it's not just as much as you leading your players through this world you've created. It's a world that you're all creating together, and you're just basically offering some support in the narrative, and you themselves become a player in its own right.
Yep.
The one thing, the one caveat that I would add is that when you have this session, you need to remember that all ideas are valid.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like any sort of, if you've been to a management meeting where they're doing brainstorming and whatever else, brainstorming is, the first rule is that there's no bad ideas. There's no ragging on other people's ideas. Everything is valid. And, you know, obviously once that idea has been presented, then it's a case of questioning that idea, throwing sort of any sort of questions at it to see whether it breaks or whether somebody else has got a better idea that they can fill those gaps in.
Or adding and improving.
Exactly.
Well, just in what you just heard, there wasn't one idea that someone put on the table that wasn't accepted. I mean, things changed and they tweaked as we started the conversation
Escalated upon.
Exactly. But there wasn't a no. It was always a yes and. Or yes, let's do this, or how can we shape that? It was always an accepting. And that's the way that you actually bring people into your game, but also how you bring people and continue their engagement long after this session takes place.
Absolutely.
They have ownership over it just as much as you have ownership over it as a GM.
Yeah. And that's a fundamental thing with Genesis, is that it's the yes and system or the no but. And that's something that I think that if you take that with you when doing this setting construction, that you're going to have a great success for all of those reasons that we've mentioned.
Or even character generation as well.
Yeah.
So when you've sat down and done, because we've just had 2 episodes of talking about how to create a character, and we talked about in one of the previous episodes having those relationships and having, how do the characters all relate to each other. Having your setting and having your characters create the setting can give them ideas about the type of character they want to have, but also the type of relationships that they want to have. Like even in our brainstorming just then, the Romeo and Juliet type of style of character, or the werewolf pirates that have lost their pack and of trying to create their own by becoming privateers, or the shadow hunter, the shadow creatures that are trying to vie for their master to come back alive and take and destroy the world so they have their freedom. You know, these different types of relationships and how they work, and even when we're talking about the city falling and the relationships they have from other ones, that all happens, and that can happen so organically just through this type of conversation. And it is a yes. It's always an open yes, or it's a no but it's always a leading on to the next thing. It's never a shut down, no, don't like that idea.
Exactly.
And adding to the character creation concept as well, after you do this and then do a character creation brainstorming session in the setting you've created, I guarantee everyone's characters are going to be 100% more invested
Yeah.
in this setting because everyone knows fairly intimately what this setting is.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
they're going to make characters so rich and connected and ingrained into it because there's no boundaries. The boundaries are what you've already created. So there's going to make some cool characters.
Yeah.
So I want to know now, what is the name of this world?
Good question.
I really like the name of Theresa.
Theresa.
Either a name of the either the planet itself, or maybe even one of the cities, or something like that, or even a character's name. But I think it sounds like, when I can imagine people yelling it out on the bow of a ship, going for Theresa.
Well, it'd be the sunken city.
Yes.
Ooh,
Yes.
Theresa's
That's
the
what-
one that fallen.
That's what sparked the need to do something.
And we had this thing before, Night's Edge.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not the name of the city. That's the name of the world that they call it now. Like the Underdark, but it's...
So almost like it's the northern hemisphere because there's no planet anymore, essentially.
Yeah.
So it's, above the clouds, below the clouds.
Exactly. And everyone lives on Night's Edge.
That's pretty good.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm liking it.
Night's Edge. They could call the Underdark the night.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's why they live on the Night's Edge.
They will plunge into the night.
So
I just
dramatic.
got goosebumps.
One last point before we start going into actually filling in the setting sheet is that one of the things that I think that some GMs who are looking after this sort of setting creation sort of session may be worried about is, we don't have a map of the world. We don't have, what every single intricate layer of the setting is, like you do for Forgotten Realms, that sort of thing, where there's so much lore. I think that there's almost a little bit of anxiety, which is caused from a GM's perspective for some people, that they don't have all of these things. I think the one thing that we have to realise with Genesis in particular is that everything is so open. Everything is a lot more cinematic. When you're going from one part of the city to the next, it's a screen wipe. It isn't it's going to take us X number of hours to get from point A to point B. That's not the point of the game.
Speed of plot.
Speed of plot. And I think that's something to really to emphasize is that when you're talking about any sort of narrative system, you are looking more at, encumbrance doesn't matter all of that much. The amount of rations that you have isn't that much. You don't need to... It's not accounting 101 when it comes to equipment management or time management or whatever else.
That's right.
It just happens at the speed of plot.
But also, talking about a map and the places and their names and things like that. We don't have names for every city yet.
No.
But that stuff will happen. It'll come with play.
Yeah, absolutely.
'Cause
that's something that the GM can do. I mean, the GM, has to obviously be the manager of the entire the campaign.
Yep.
So they're the sorts of things that can be thrown in. But it's also the sorts of things that other players can then, between sessions, be going, hey, I've got this great idea for a city. Wouldn't this be cool?
It'll come up in character gen.
Or it will come up in character gen, exactly.
Or you as the GM, it can have a list of random names and the players travel to a new city and you pick one of those random names and then you say to one of the players at the table, what does this city look like?
Yeah. Yep.
Then watch the brainstorming start when all the players start feeding off each other's ideas. Well, this is an Oriental city and they still use... Instead of using blimps, they use Chinese junks to move around.
That is so cool.
I
like that.
One of the cities is not actually on a chunk of earth that's been raised up. What it is like in Hong Kong and that, how they've got all of the little ships on the water.
Oh, yes.
And it's all linked together. They're
A whole city of ships
that have been permanently locked together in order to create this.
all lashed together.
Yeah.
Nice.
They're all
I like
it's
that.
all wibbly wobbly and
Yeah.
Because that's also something that I think that doesn't happen enough in other game settings where the GM has a lot more of the narrative control than the players, and the players are just playing in his playground. I think that what this game has at its core is to ask the question that Mike just said, which was you point to a player and say, well, tell me what that looks like, or put it to the table. What does this look like? Because it's a lot more about the players having the input, because as I said before, that buy-in becomes so much greater if they've got an input. And, I know that I like to do this in my scenes. I probably didn't do a lot of it when I first started playing Star Wars. but I certainly do it now, where I'll turn to a player and say, okay, what does that look like? What does this area look like? Because I don't necessarily have it in my mind. I just know there's this setting and this sort of scenario is going to happen. But if I turn to a player and say, tell me what that's going to look like, they're going to be so much more immersed, and that is then going to become contagious throughout the entire table.
Exactly.
Because that sort of, if you've got somebody who's really invested in that part of the setting, that they're going to put that enthusiasm onto the next person, and that's going to become contagious again, and they're going to get enthused, and then they're going to put their ideas. And so suddenly you've got a table full of ideas, and I tell you what, as a GM, that makes your job about a gazillion times easier.
Because you can just pluck up their ideas and add to your own.
Absolutely. Yeah.
See, I guess what you're trying to say is like the plot and story that's moving along is important for the GM to control to a degree.
Absolutely.
But the cosmetics of the world around them, let the players make that up.
Yeah.
Because if a building is purple and green and has Asian, sculpture to it, cool. If it's this Roman style structure with very fortified walls, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the plot that's happening inside those buildings is the important thing.
Yep.
So let the players have that deeper control of the world around them. It's
Exactly.
really good.
Okay, so now that we've gone through the process of setting up the settings, so to speak, as I mentioned sort of at the start of going through this process, is that there is the setting document that is actually on page 137 of the core rulebook for those who are following on at home. What we're going to do is we're not going to actually fill in this sheet. However, what we are going to do is we'll make what we've designed tonight available online. You can download it via the Dicepool Podcast Facebook page, as well as the Dicepool Podcast website at www.thedicepoolpodcast.com. So what we're going to do, though, is so that everybody's got a pretty clear idea how to fill in this sheet. When you go and design your own setting, we're going to go through each one of these things. We might mention some of the things that I think we can decide that we go along, but otherwise we'll just mention it in briefly so that people have an idea what actually goes into those segments.
Yeah, we could just use some of our elements as examples almost.
Exactly. All right, so Mike, take it away. What is the first part of the sheet?
So the first part is your setting and your setting's name. Now we came up with the Knight's Edge for our setting. For what we discussed before, and we think that's pretty fitting for our world. Yeah. So that's probably the first thing you need to create.
So what's the world itself actually going to be called?
That's
a good question. Caitlin, do you have an idea?
Well, we were talking before, and we were talking about Knight's Edge, there being clouds, there being shadows, and there being lots of darkness, and darkness trying to take over. So, and always, Latin's always a good way to go when you're struggling to find some names. So
what fits with the vampiric sort of dark undertones?
The Victorian era type thing, yep.
And if anyone knows me and has been in any one of my campaigns, for some strange reason, shadows and darkness always plays a role in the title.
Just a coincidence.
So I thought, well, we were chatting, I just had a look at what light and the darkness is in Latin.
Ooh.
And, roughly translated by yours truly, is lux in tenebris, is what, in a very Australian accent, is what light and the darkness is in Latin. And maybe some kind of version of that would be cool because, we're shrouded in darkness now. Maybe the earth that was the light. That is
something like Luxembourg? Sound
and any time that you have a long name like that over the generations, it gets shortened or refined.
There's lots of ways you could do it. I imagine like the more higher ups would probably call it by maybe it's proper name, but who knows? It's honestly, as we're playing, we'll probably refer to this place, or the people in the world will probably refer to this place as Knight's Edge more often than not because the old world's gone, and people live on these isolated island states. So they're probably more going to call their little world whatever city name they live on.
That's right, or even call it just the Edge.
And even then, like potentially some of like the swear words that they have or different types of things is Lux, or like be careful, otherwise I'll send you all the way down to Lux. And it's like because it's that's the shortened version of it, but everyone knows what it means.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah,
love it.
All right, what's next on the character sheet?
Next is your base setting and genre. So that's a bit of a broad one for us. We've got a few of them. So we came up with Victorian mage punk, apocalyptic horror.
I love that so much.
Is there enough titles there?
No, I think I cram a few more in there.
I think we could.
Airship combat dudes.
That's it, right? Forget the rest.
Yeah.
Then after that, it's your tone. Again, we've got a pretty grim setting, I think. So you could probably call us a grim fantasy, dark fantasy.
Yep.
The list could really go on. And
Yeah.
Well, it's a very dark setting. Everything's dying. The resources are going.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That's right.
And the next is your overview. Now, this is where you, as either the GM creating this or the group of players, would write down and take notes of what you've discussed and determined for your world. There's not much room in the sheet itself, but, crack out a notepad and add to it if you need to.
Yep.
But I think a good thing to keep in mind when you're filling this sheet out, it's your elevator pitch. You
Yep.
chuck on here.
Yep.
It's what you'd read in the back of a book when you flip it over to see if you want to buy it or not. The main points that get the element of the story or the setting across to yourself and the players, because not every RPG group is going to have the luxury of creating the world together like this. So you want to hand this to your players so they can have a read through it and see in broad strokes what they're getting in for in your campaign or in your setting.
And effectively, we created our overview when we picked out our 4 elements at
Yeah,
the very beginning
exactly.
of this podcast.
And if you really want to sort of go into the nuts and bolts, as long as it starts with "in a world." So, yes, all right.
The next part is a section of the sheet called genre, settings, tropes, and themes. Now, there's 3 little text box, each with their own sort of heading, and you fill these out basically by what they say. The first one will ask you what tropes, themes about technology, human nature, morality, or reality are you including? Again, not a lot of space there for you to fill that out, but just broad strokes.
Yep.
Get your notepad out and fill in the blanks as you need to. Next part is what tropes, themes are you excluding? Now, again, that is going to be very dependent on the setting you're in. Obviously, if you're playing in a high fantasy, you're not going to have, gunslingers with blaster pistols.
Well, for us, high science isn't really a...
No.
Well, that's it.
Yes.
We got high, but
Sci-fi.
mage punk, I guess you'd call it, was what we're using. The last one is what tropes, themes are you subverting?
Because it's kind of asking what are you turning on its head from the norm.
Exactly, that's true. That's a good point.
So that's probably the best way to describe that, I think.
There's a lot of heads being turned in this one, in our setting, I think. We've got a bit of a mashup of everything, which is cool.
Absolutely.
But, people usually think, when someone says apocalyptic, they usually think, Mad Max.
Yeah.
But you can have any sort of end-of-world crisis be an apocalyptic setting without everything being ash and dust.
Yep.
And this is a good example of that.
So, Martin, next part of the setting sheet, would you like to take us through that?
Yeah, well, we've got factions and organizations. And so it wants us to put down at least 4. I mean, you could probably have more.
No more, no less. Must be 4.
It says, what are the major factions and organizations in the setting and what are their objectives? Well, we came up with a few, you've got
Dark Window.
Shadowhold.
Yep.
And I just even thought about the fact that every time he sends someone down to the darkness, it grows stronger. Every time anyone is sent to the night, it grows because they don't die.
No. They come in thrall.
And that's why the Shadowhold doesn't get taken over by the darkness when it's down below, because
he feeds them. Oh, he has a tithe he has to fill.
Yeah.
Maybe
souls.
he's entered into some sort of pact.
And so we'd have the Shadowhold here. We would have each of the city-states.
Yep.
And I don't know, maybe
the werewolves
the
themselves.
werewolves themselves,
Yep.
with their
Clans, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fill out whatever you need.
Cool.
But don't limit yourself to 4.
Yes.
No, have as many as you want.
Or the freebooters as well, or their own faction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, true.
But if you have at least 4, that's going to give you,
Plenty-
I think, a
plenty to
good
play with.
starting area. And you can add to it as you go, as you play the game, essentially. But have 4 major entities or factions or whatever in play, and you're not going to run out of ideas for at least 4.
No.
There's lots to play with.
And the GM can then sit down with those 4 in sort of like a notepad or on a whiteboard or whatever else, and then start linking things together as to what those connections are, what kind of like what you do during a session 0 for when you're doing those with your own characters. What are the connections there? He or she can start looking at that in a format of what is the ties that bring the werewolves and the humans together. And we discussed that during the process. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that can start to be fleshed out there.
Yep.
Caitlin,
So the next section that we have is movers and shakers, with the main question being, who are the major personalities in the setting and what are their objectives? And even in our conversations, we've talked about some of the major ones that we have. As we said, Dark Lando, we have the original vampire, the original werewolf, potentially some of the major families that are operating these cities and operating all the types of people that potentially could have a role in impacting and causing conflict or adventure or some kind of involvement into the characters and the story that you're about to tell using that setting.
Yeah, we have to have a Sky Queen.
Oh, you do.
Yes.
Oh, it'd be cool, like a Genghis Khan type who rules from his, ramshackle city-state, and they raid out in parties, and they come back with their loot and wares.
I imagine the Sky Queen was actually on the city Theresa that fell.
She's
And
exiled.
so
she's an exile one.
she's displaced.
Displaced.
Yeah,
That's
it's
better.
supposed to be better
right.
for it. Yeah.
And she's also the ex-lover of Dark Lando.
Oh, there you go.
So you have
Part
a...
of how the city fell.
She can't prove it, but Dark Lando
Yeah.
is behind it.
But there's this weird, still sexual tension between the two, and
they're still in love.
You don't, yeah,
That's what they are.
But
She
they have
doesn't
no
know,
idea.
but she has a feeling that he betrayed her.
yeah.
So many moving
See,
parts.
even when you start filling in this sheet,
Yeah.
we're still coming up with
It
ideas.
refines it. It's asking you questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stuff that we overlooked and didn't do. Like it's great.
Yeah. So for our last part, it starts looking at the major species or archetypes. So that's going to be things like your werewolves, your
Humans.
the humans who've been touched by the magic,
Yep.
the standard humans, people who might be touched by the Shadow Realm as well.
Oh, shadow hybrids. They're
Shadow hybrids, yeah.
And that could
Tainted.
be some of the humans that were sent down and managed to maybe fight their way back up again,
Yeah.
but they're
Never
forever
the same.
tainted and
Or even the ones that live down there.
Yeah, that's how they survive. They're like on the edge
And
of both realities.
I kind of imagine that sometimes, how when you see people with movement and it's jarring because it's almost like a shadow of their former self stays still while their physical body moves. So it's almost like a little. If anyone's seen Altered Carbon,
Yes.
thank you very much, Martin. If anyone's seen the most recent Altered Carbon, where he's actually changing between faces in this virtual reality world, it's kind of like he shakes his head, but like the previous person is still there. It's almost like a glitch in the system. But imagine this is in shadow and smoke.
They could be your archetype that's really good for rogues and impersonators and
Absolutely.
subterfuge and all sorts of spy sort of stuff.
Because that's how they stay hidden from the thralls down below.
You would have to call it shadow touched, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Or Shadowkin.
Shadowkin.
Shadowkin,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ooh, maybe there could be a difference. The Shadowkin is the actual shadow creatures themselves, but shadow touched is the ones who have been physically altered by being in contact or being sent down there or
and
having
somehow survived or something like that.
And
yeah.
normal folk, or as far as you can call them normal folk, call them shades.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
But they're
Like
like the ones that because it's a couple of generations since the fall of Lux and Tenebris.
Yep.
They are they're the descendants of those that remained behind.
I love it because
they're undying as well, but they are so cool.
it's incredibly Dragon Age, and I love it.
And of course, I would like to just suggest that maybe, just maybe, because we have obviously a lot of listeners that like them, you can always have maybe some throwback vampires as well that have managed to survive.
Yeah.
Possibly more of an NPC.
Yeah. Well, we can definitely do something with that.
But they could be half-bloods.
Yeah, that's what
That
I mean.
survived
Sort of
the
like,
purge.
yeah.
And they're like, oh, I'm still a vampire. Thumbs up. No, you're not. But they still think they've got the... They see themselves almost as the original vampires because there's no one else around anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, it's kind of like in Blade, where you have the people that are like, no, I'm completely, you got the half-bloods that are considered lower class, but they still identify themselves
Like
as high
daywalkers,
society.
you would call them or something
Yeah,
like
but
that.
it's almost like mudbloods kind of
Maybe,
thing.
maybe that's what Dark Lando is.
Ooh.
And that's
Well,
why
I
it
think-
works so close with both the darkness and connection to the human side of it.
I feel
I am
like
so glad we're recording this conversation because
I feel like his heritage, because we know he's something, and I think the world knows that he's something,
Yeah.
But there's a big question mark as to exactly what.
And I think always never giving solid answers to that is very key in the setting. Never solidify who he is. Always leave the players asking, who's this guy? What's his connection?
Even to the moment they kill him, they still never know for certain who he was and what his ultimate plan was.
I absolutely love how going through this character sheet, we've answered questions, put even more meat onto the bones of a setting that we essentially created over an hour and a half creating.
Yeah.
And as well, just one idea of the idea of the underground, how is that going to work on this world, has created this character that we are all equally obsessed with.
Who is this man?
Any idea that we have come up with is somehow tied back to this dark Lando, and it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can picture the current image from the Han Solo film of Lando, actual Lando sitting there with his like fur coat, which would be incredibly rare nowadays because where are the animals? We haven't even talked about if there's any beasts or anything like that.
Oh, there'd be things down on the planet.
Griffins for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But he's wearing that coat and looks very
The imagery for me though that I've been seeing whenever I see this Dark Lando is the image of a man very proper and very Lando-like, but half of his body, like down one of his arms or something, has that double image that Caitlin was mentioning,
He keeps a cloak over it. So it's always he's got this half cloak always over his one shoulder, but every now and then it falls aside and you see a glimpse of it.
Yeah, like a dark mist dropping from the sleeve.
Roiling out from beneath.
Almost as if, dry ice, but it's black.
Exactly.
But it's black instead of,
That's what I've been seeing in my head every time we talk about it.
The curling look that blood makes when it's in water.
Ooh, yeah.
As well as it almost being like
Seeping.
like a tentacle as well. So like it's almost like it's all.
Yeah.
Oh, I love. This is what I mean.
This is the second setting now that we've gone, we need to play in this game.
Yeah.
With our Firefly from last one. Yeah,
This is why Genesis is so amazing.
But we've got 2 more elements on this sheet.
Yep.
That we need to run through.
So the last 2 elements, we have the skill set, which is effectively all of the skills that you're going to be using during the campaign. This is important, I think, for players to have by the time that you're sitting down to create characters, because obviously you need to know what skills you're going to be using, and when it comes to careers, what skills they're going to have available.
Oh, yeah. True. Yeah. And these are going to be fairly self-explanatory. I think a lot of the time, flying I guess you could fly a spaceship. Speaking of flying the airships, perhaps airships aren't flown by agility; they're flown by discipline. So they're willpower based, opposed to intelligence or agility.
That's different.
Well,
That's cool.
Well, we were talking about their ability to
connect
with the ship and be one with the ship essentially. So it's not necessarily about how smart you are in piloting the ship. It's about how much you can handle and how much you can take,
how
and how
attuned you are,
and how ingrained you are into that ship.
So agility becomes less of a
if you man the guns on the side, you'll need agility.
That's right.
Yeah, true. But it means that you're going to have people, not just the agility based characters that are going to be running or helping to run the ship. You're going to have people who are jacked into the ship effectively and using the willpower. I like that. That's great.
It really opens a stat you would never really look at for piloting or anything like that.
No.
And suddenly your wise old character, he might not necessarily be fast or strong, but he's immediately very important and crucial to any airship because he plugs into it and goes, I'm the brains around here when it comes to this. And his discipline and attunement to it just resonates off of him.
Love it.
Or we could even make an entirely new magical skill.
Interesting, yeah.
Based on willpower that works for piloting these ships.
Exactly, yeah. It all derives from the piloting
exactly.
rules.
You would
but
call it
a magical twist.
You perhaps call it attunement.
Because you could also potentially have that for not only your ships but any smaller vehicles as well, or even weaponry or any other that type of equipment. Being able to attune to different things and jack into different things and have control over it is almost like having a character that has cybernetics or something like that allows them to communicate and work with technology. However, what we're talking about is inanimate vehicles, equipment, weapons, all those kinds of
little drones that buzz around that are controlled by someone sitting there channeling in willpower.
God, I want that character so bad.
So you could have your engineer type who uses intelligence for his engineering, who also has high willpower, is very important too to manipulate and tune things around him.
I love our brains.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing to when you're looking at the skills that you're going to be using, you can certainly see just by that conversation alone that the skills are actually going to be driven by the campaign that you've decided upon, and it's also going to drive the campaign themselves. So there's going to have this symbiotic relationship as to how the world actually works.
It's your chance to get sort of creative and think out of the box in a way. How you can use your skills in a different way to really resonate and connect to the campaign.
Yeah, exactly. And our last part would obviously be the technology level, which I think we've pretty much covered, but that sort of would be what sort of equipment would be available, what sort of vehicles, what runs them, that sort of thing. Much of what we've talked about as far as...
Do you have access to guns, or are they flintlocks?
A gun's rare, it's going to be...
Yeah.
Do guns even exist?
Yeah. Swords and crossbows, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And a lot of the time it's going to be very obvious what's available if you're playing a standard low fantasy game.
Yeah.
Well,
swords and crossbows and that sort of thing.
But then again, even in our setting, it's a question: is there an equivalent to a computer?
Exactly.
Because it could be something that is completely magical in nature. And yeah.
So in essence, this section is just going to show what sort of equipment is going to be available to your players that they can purchase during their character creation, as well as obviously what sort of stuff that they can buy later on down the track during the campaign. Interesting. Well, look, if you've got any ideas about a setting that you've thought about, that you've created a bit of a source book for, or even if you've just got some ideas for our little campaign setting as well, let us know. Post it up on Facebook, send us an email, or visit us on Twitter as well.
You know what?
What?
I'm going to challenge the listeners to play a game in this setting.
Wow.
Ooh.
And let us know how you go.
Yeah.
Tell us about the story.
Use our rough notes, take it as your own and go nuts.
Well, yeah, we are going to make this available.
We will,
and we'll come up with some archetypes and things.
Exactly. Let us know how you go because we're keen because we've got a lot on our plate, so we'll probably get around to playing for a while. So be keen to see how you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the other side of it as well is that we want to do more of these roulette style episodes.
Yep.
So we can potentially even open this up where you can submit your own ideas and thoughts about different types of campaigns, and we can pick those ones out of the hat just as much as we can do our own. So, stay tuned for that. But also, if you like what we've done here in this episode, let us know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think that brings us to the next part of the show where we'll answer some questions from our listeners.
Do you mean behind the screens?
Yeah, that's it. Behind the screens. And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the hosts of the show, will answer your games and rule questions regarding the Genesis roleplay game. And tonight, we have some great questions, both mechanically as well as setting-wise. So our first question tonight, Martin, take it away.
Yeah, so we've got our first one here from a gentleman by the name of Mark Natres. And he's written, I would like to hear your group's opinions on playing a setting in a generic system. Let us say Star Trek in Genesis, compared to playing the system made specifically for that setting. For example, Modiphius?
I think that's how I pronounce it. Yeah,
that's the Star Trek one. Yep. The reason this topic interests me is games made for specific settings tend to have rules that combine theme and narrative with mechanics in a fun, clever, and interesting way. How much do you miss out on that blending of theme and mechanics by playing a generic system? How hard is it to bring some of that clever blending into the generic system? A very good question.
A huge question. Michael?
I guess if you're picking up a game like Star Trek that Modiphius has written exclusively for that world, then it's going to be written with all the bits and pieces in that setting or world, like Star Trek, encased into it essentially. Yeah. But that's not to say you can't branch it out, because let's not forget, until Modiphius wrote the rules for their Star Trek game, you could very well still easily play Star Trek in any other system like D20 and whatnot. So if Modiphius have special mechanics, bring them along as well to Genesis, but rewrite them or retool them so they work in Genesis. And whatever they are, because I'm not too sure. I'm not familiar with the Star Trek setting in Modiphius. I haven't read those rules. But if they've got unique things, then bring them across as well. That's my suggestion.
I think as well with Genesis, it's actually made it generic enough and customizable enough that you can bring the elements that that really brought that theme forward and actually transfer them into Genesis. And the other side of it is that part of what the system does for that, it allows you to do it, but also what makes the narrative fun and clever and interesting is not necessarily the mechanics behind it. What makes you love that game, love that theme, love that story is the narrative that you brings around it. How you organize the rules in order to have that flow nicely is completely up to you as a GM and also up to your players as well. So understanding that sometimes those little interesting little settings or rules can bring a different element to the game. Don't get so bogged down in making the rules the whole purpose of the game to the detriment of the narrative.
Yeah, I also think that Genesis, one of the things that it does really well is that you can focus, because it is so simple in its execution, that it allows you to focus more on the narrative, because it is a narrative system, rather than getting bogged down in complex rules, which is often one of the trademarks of these very specific systems, is that they have so many rules. They're complex and all-encompassing.
Yep.
Whereas, in Genesis, you can apply a dice check to just about anything in a general sort of a catch-all.
Yeah.
But so once you've got the system together for what you want to do, it just flows. And I think Genesis would be perfect for something like Star Trek, given what we know.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I'd just like to iterate what you said, Martin, that effectively Genesis and Star Wars before it, it's not a high mechanical system.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that is something that just reading what a lot of people are doing with their settings, and they're sort of getting really tied up with especially D&D crossover, where they're trying to bring in these spells, and they're saying, well, look, we have to account for every single spell. That's kind of getting away what Genesis is about. Genesis is not about mechanics. Yes, there are mechanics in the game, but it is not a mechanic-heavy system. It is focusing more on the narrative and the story that you're generating at the table as a group.
Yeah.
And I think that people have to move away from that.
I mean, you can create those mechanics if that makes you engage with the system better.
Sure.
Exactly, yeah.
But don't get hung up on it.
A perfect example is the Stars of Outnumber campaign we're playing in. That's a complete hack of a normally very crunchy system.
Yep.
And Josh is using, for everything we do dice roll related, interactions, combat, etc., that is all Genesis. And we've done literally no work in porting that across. We've just used the sci-fi armory that I've written, and that's it. Yeah. But the biggest, crunchiest part that sells Stars of Outnumber is the galaxy building system and the campaign management system that Stars of Outnumber has. Now, Josh has just transplanted that straight into Genesis, because all that's
word for word.
Yeah, it's word for word. It's all very narrative. There's no that system. It's campaign. It's galaxy and star system generating system.
Yep.
There's no actual mechanics.
There's no actual real mechanics. It's worlds, planets, names, and stuff like that. So you can plug that into any system if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful how seamlessly that's gone into it. So if there is a mechanic in a particular game you like, and this goes back to what I said just earlier, if there is a particular mechanic in a game that you like, look at it and go, well, okay, why is this working in this? And can I just bring it straight to Genesis?
What makes this good?
Yeah.
But I'd just like to go back a second, because a lot of people have been asking us what Josh did in order to create that world. They want to see what we've done with the Stars Without Number world. And there isn't much to it.
No.
It is literally just a port of that mechanic for creating a world, your sci-fi armory there, and just recosting a couple of the items. And that's it. Oh, and the psychic side of things.
One of the big things that I from doing the Ghostbusters one that I'm working on with Corey and Justin, one of the things that we found right from the start is that you have to set your skill set or the skills list really early in the piece, because that can link into your archetypes, that can link into your careers.
Yep.
So you have to work out and go, right, well, how's my world going to run via skills? And once you've got that, kind of everything else comes into play. But and that's kind of what we did with Stars Without Number as well.
Yeah, and we basically just added some extra knowledge, specialized knowledge skills.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
The talents are just the expanded talent list from the resources on the Fantasy Flight boards. Great resource. And some very loosey-goosey
archetype rules.
Archetype rules, which is just drawing from basically the basic book in Star Wars.
Yep.
And the psychic rules, which is very narrative.
Yep.
There's no crunch to it at all.
There's no magic in inverted comma rules for the psychic powers.
Effectively, for how that works for the psychic, which is the character that I play in the Stars Without Number system, I actually have a skill that is telekinesis and teleportation. Thank you very much for reminding me what my character is actually able to do. And basically, the skills, the ranks that I have in those skills identify the rank I am in able to enact that skill.
Yep.
So if I have 3 ranks in that, I am effectively a level 2 in my psychic ability.
Yep.
So, and that allows me to have 2 effort. If I'm going to expend that means that I expend 1 effort to do that and I'm successfully able to do it. So it's limited in the sense that I can't be teleporting around something like Nightcrawler would be able to do, but I do have like 2 moments in each session where I could do something really, really cool. So that's a good example of how a mechanic that's not necessarily Genesis has been transported and still works within the system. It's using the skills, it's using the narrative dice, and it's not limiting the story or what the characters are able to do. Because I think that's another thing as well to consider.
Yeah.
If you try and blend too much of the mechanics of other systems into Genesis, you're effectively trying to merge two systems together, which means double the rules, which also means double the restrictions on players. And I know one of the reasons that I love Genesis or I love the narrative dice so much is I don't feel restricted in what I'm able to do. In doing D&D previously, I'd be like, oh, I want to roll in and do a backflip and do all that kind of stuff. All right, stop before you even go any further. Can you roll an athletics check to see if you can do a backflip? And if I'm not, then I'd pretty much sit down. Well, probably, knowing me, I wouldn't roll that high anyway and fall over or something. So that's it. That's the end of my turn. Done.
Yeah, Caitlin makes a good point. You can go too far with transplanting rules from another system, because if you take stuff that's too crunchy from another system and drop it straight into Genesis, you end up with just extra crunch on top of pre-existing rules, and it all becomes very muddled up. So you want to try and find those very clean, crisp transplants that you can do of those rules. I think that's
because I think that for example, let's use Star Wars because it's obviously an established system using the narrative dice, and it's been going for years. Is that it really only has 2 additional mechanics on top of what Genesis has.
That makes
the
it Star Wars, yeah.
Yep, the Force, which is what makes it Star Wars.
Yep.
And then, depending on whether you're playing Edge or Age or Force and Destiny, you have one of those mechanics. Yes, you can throw the whole of those 3 in there.
Like obligation,
duty, and morality. But realistically, you only need 1 of those. So you would have, and you don't even need the Force. So I guess it goes down to look at what is your core belief in the setting, what your
core mechanic,
the core focus of the setting itself. There, pick something, as you say. Don't make it too complex. Don't try to merge in too much. Just use it as it is. With some set up your skills, set up your talents, and then just find a key focus, whether it be like duty. I think would be something from Age of Rebellion that would work perfectly in a Star Trek setting.
So I think to summarize that, you can get a lot of the flavor from these settings just by bringing the defining characteristics across that don't interfere with the base mechanics. And then flavoring the world through your narrative.
Exactly.
And that's going to give you the feel for the world. And I don't think that you actually end up missing out on much at all. And it improves it because you can focus more on the narrative without getting bogged down in rules.
True.
So it's not hard.
No.
Do it. Get out there.
Exactly.
That's it.
Caitlin, our second question for this evening.
Okay, our second question
And it's a long one.
It is a long one. So our next question comes from Laurent, which was an email to us. So the question starts off with, I started to listen to your show and I'll keep listening to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks
We've
very
got
much,
one.
yeah.
Yes. I'm planning to run an Arkham horror game using Genesis. I have some questions. Maybe you can help me. Fingers crossed we can. Question 1. I was wondering which skill check you would recommend using when characters are searching for clues or information in a library or a newspaper archive. Number 2 is knowing the occult/mythos lore is specific, and I was thinking of inventing the skill instead of using the generic knowledge skill. Do you have any thoughts? And the third question is, there is no demolition skill in the rulebook. How could I have characters check to make explosives, plant them, and arm/disarm a bomb? Thanks, and keep up the good work. We will.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Yes.
Love it. All right, so let's give these questions a quick whirl. Michael.
Well, the first question in regards to how do you have your PCs, what skill to use for your PCs to search for clues and information? Well, I think there's two obvious ones in this. One, probably more so than the others, is perception. Perception is, I guess, your catch-all for anything, finding clues and stuff like that. But you can use other skills and get creative with it. I think the second obvious one is vigilance, because vigilance is a person's ability to pick up on things without really actively looking for something. So like a hard-boiled, old-school detective can walk into a crime scene and without actively looking around for something, he can tell something's off. And that's what vigilance is for. Whilst your CSI team would probably be using perception because they're more closely analysing the crime scene.
It also depends what clues you're looking for.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if you're looking for things in a newspaper, as a suggestion in this, hidden messages from other contacts or people trying to pass things in the classifieds, might be skullduggery. Or perhaps even streetwise.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And they're good ones,
Because there's another element to as well, because it's, making a skill check when I'm trying to find something is pretty easy to go, well, that's a perception skill. The other side of it is that you have your story points as a GM, and you also have the ability to set difficulty, which can actually change. Whereas the skill set is, perception, using your abilities to change the narrative to make that a bit more of an interesting skill check, if that's what you're looking to do, is an option for you. So perhaps you've got, roll for perception, that could potentially be, maybe if that's what you're looking for, could potentially just be a pretty standard response for someone trying to find something. Flipping a story point and making it a little bit more difficult by adding difficulty die and adding a story element to that can make that skill check a little bit more interesting and a little bit more juicy, right? Versus, when we're talking about different ways of doing it, that's another, just an interesting way of making a pretty stock standard skill check into something much more fun.
Yeah. Look, my take on it is that I know that, again, I'll go back to Ghostbusters because that's currently what I'm working on. But we've actually decided after a lot of debate, because that's a key thing that is going to play a part in what the setting is, that we've actually decided to have investigation as a skill. But we've also had knowledge education, where if you're being educated, you're used to working in a library. So, that's another way that you could look at it as well. And that's just pulling straight from Star Wars as well.
Knowledge education would be like your research skill in this case. Because it's what you generally know and how to find that information.
That's right. But just going on to what Caitlin suggested before as well, is that one of the things I like to go back to is skill challenges. And as a GM, once you've worked out what sort of skills that you've got, you can throw back to the players to go, what other skills do you want to use? And that you don't necessarily need to just use, if you had like a research skill, you could go and say, the most perfect skill is research, and that's going to be 1 purple difficulty. But somebody might say, well, I've lived in a place that has a large library before. Perhaps I'm used to just wandering around to make sure that I don't get captured. Can I use perception instead? Sure, but it might be 1 difficulty greater, or there might be some setback die, and for a description on that, probably a boost die as well. But it's so flexible. The system is so flexible to be able to just really manage with that. You kind of don't necessarily need to break from having just a knowledge skill, but
it's basically just the the basic rules in the book do cover this.
Yeah.
But the idea of creating an additional knowledge skill ties into the next question.
Yeah, exactly. So the second part of his question is asking about whether to have an occult mythos skill or just stick with the generic knowledge skill.
He's listed the two knowledge skills right there. Knowledge occult, knowledge mythos.
Exactly.
That's your two skills you need in knowledge. And I think that's a good time to point it out as well, because I think a lot of new people to the system don't realise is that in the book in Genesis it presents knowledge as it seems like it's just one skill.
Yep.
But knowledge is meant to be broken up into multiple different types of knowledge skills. So obviously you can't have, because Genesis is written to be very generic, you can't have a list of knowledge skills because knowledge is very dependent on the system on the setting you're playing in. So when you create your system, your setting as a GM, you will need to create your base knowledge skills, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, depending on where you're playing in.
Yeah, just watch for skill bloat and how much that's going to impact
absolutely.
the players. But go ahead, make a couple of skills. Remember that knowledge by itself can just be your basic knowledge.
Correct,
general thing. Anything that's not covered by the additional skills goes onto that.
So
And think about the different outcomes that you would have if a player did perform different skill checks. So you've already identified the two ones that you're going to have, but if you're going to have like occult versus religion or things like that, would the information that you get by using the two different skills actually result a different outcome or give you different information?
Yep.
If it does, yes, separate them. If it doesn't, look at a way of combining them so
Combine
it
them,
doesn't have too much of getting, because you don't want to have one player that goes, I'm going to do a occult one and then I'm going to go and do a religion one, and you get the exact same information, because that would be not fair.
At the same time, though, like that's an interesting point. You can also, when you as a GM, you're giving out information to players from knowledge checks. If someone makes a knowledge, for example, religion, and someone else makes a knowledge occult skill checks, you could put a different filter on the two answers depending on the knowledge skill taken.
Could too.
Because if someone wants a knowledge occult regarding a specific religion, you're going to have a lot more shady sort of
or just the different perception of it.
Perceptions of it, exactly it. So that's another cool thing, is a little GM trick you can do. You can give the players different flavors of information on the same subject by using two different skill checks, two different knowledge checks.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just one last thing with that you can also do, even if you decided to have for a cult, you would just have one knowledge religion. What you could also say is, depending on who it is, what character you're talking to. So if you're talking to a priest, you may not necessarily have a cult, but they would have religion. So if there was a question about a religious rites type thing, that you might say to the occult expert, well, you can make the same check, use the same skill, but because of your background, have a couple of setback die as well.
Yeah, because this isn't something you'd necessarily know.
No, exactly.
But
So-
it's easy to accept that person who has a lot of knowledge of a cult will probably have a fair bit of sort of knowledge about general religion as well.
Yeah, so it just depends. I mean, that's just an example, I guess. But there are... Don't forget your setback die, I guess, is what I'm saying.
You've got to give out setback die for people to be able to remove them using their
This is true.
knacks.
This is very
Yeah.
true as well.
Because it almost then becomes a prompt then for them to use their background to say, well, this is the reason why I have got knack for it, because, yeah, sure, I'm not really a religious expert, but I've read enough about these religious people that I know exactly the sort of thing that we're looking for. I remove those two setback. So, yeah.
And finally,
Yep.
The last question is, what skill to use for setting bombs, planting them, or even disarming bombs? Pretty quick answer on this one. Mechanics was what we recommend, and that's because that's what's used in the Star Wars role-playing game.
Yep.
Setting a bomb, disarming a bomb, mechanics. Keep it simple. You could create your own skill if you wanted to, but it's not really necessary at the end of the day.
I mean, if the game that you're playing is based on Rainbow Six, maybe you want to have an additional skill because it's something
absolutely.
huge to the game.
Yep.
But generally speaking, mechanics is going to cover everything that you need for this.
Yep.
And it also makes the person that is the engineer in the team have an extra, trick up their sleeve.
Yep. Exactly. So, yeah. So that answers that question. And so for our last question, which comes from our friend Mitch, who says, are you willing to pull back the curtain on how do you resolve blast damage from the Dwarven Firebomb, which you can refer to our live play episode, the Dwarven Bomb against a minion group in the most recent live play. As you pointed out, there are several suggestions out there on how best to resolve it. Now, the way that I resolved it in the session, I will admit, we just made it up as we went along because I didn't want to slow down the session to start looking up rules, and that's something that I think is a very important thing to remember. Don't let the rules get in the way of a good story.
Blasting its minions is one of those points of contention in this system forever.
So much.
Well, you look at how long Star Wars has been out for, and that question is being asked for since the start of that. So
there is a raw answer, and that is that you cannot hit a minion group with that is targeted by a blast weapon with the blast quality, but that just doesn't satisfy most people because a minion group is multiple people. Why can't you?
I want my shotgun that's firing into a tight nest of people to really, really hurt that tight nest of people.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how blast works.
Yeah. So we came up with a solution, and it's pretty simple. So the suggestion is allow blast damage to affect the minion group that was targeted.
That's it. You just add that line to the end.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So in theory, how that essentially works is if the minion group takes a direct hit from the blast weapon of, say, 10, then the blast is triggered and then has a blast value of 4, then the minion group's going to take 10 damage from the direct hit and then 4 blast damage.
Adding any successes.
Of course, yeah. But effectively, think of it like as linked. It's essentially linked, but the second attack isn't a second attack, it's just using the blast quality.
Which will also hit any additional minion groups or nemesis or whatever around them, but that's not important to what we're discussing here.
But the other thing that it will take into consideration as well is that if you miss, that you just use an additional advantage to activate the blast, because if you miss, it costs you 1 extra to activate, and then it can also still affect that minion group. So, it kind of, sure, you throw it into the minion group and you miss. Oh, well, none of them are affected. Yeah. As we said, it's just not satisfying, and I think that's the biggest complaint that people have got. So
that doesn't make sense.
No, not at all.
Because we decided to sit down and as a podcast, we're going to make a definitive answer to this, and it's a house rule. It's only a suggestion, of course. It's not raw, but how we play at the table, and we've tested this now. We've played it in our games, and it's smooth, it's seamless. There's no arguing. There's no spending 3 hours working out the math behind it.
It's not math heavy. It's just
clean and crisp, and it makes those weapons that you never really use that often fantastic because that blast is doing something.
Killing minions, it becomes great.
And particularly when you have a house rule like that has been developed and created, it's consistent.
It is.
Which, as a player, is what you want to have when it comes to those types of rules, and particularly about those topics that are contentious. You agree up front that this is the house rule and how this world is and how this session or how this game is going to be played. And so it's consistent throughout the rest of the game, and there's no, what happened for one player isn't going to happen to another player.
And I know, just personally, like just recently, I've decided to go into Demolitionist for one of my Star Wars characters. Before, I would never even consider that tree because it's like, oh man, I don't want to get into this blast debate every time I make an attack. So I just left it alone. But now we have a clear, concise answer, and everyone at the table knows it. Demolition away. It's going to be fantastic, and things are going to blow up. And a bit of a tip for the GM: if you find this to be very powerful, because the players have realised this, and they're going to just bring blast and grenades everywhere,
and just wipe out all your minion groups.
Just spend a story point, and guess what? Another minion group rolls into the fight. So if your players kill your minion groups within the first half a round, just chuck in more minion groups.
Yeah, that's third, the bombs go off, and more guards have run into.
That's what minions are for.
It's not as though the campaign police, and there's the campaign police again, get a mention, it's great. But it's not as though the campaign police are going to come in and say, I'm sorry, but you've only got a budget for 3 minion groups. You can't go over that.
You add what's needed in order to make the encounter fun.
Exactly.
Don't make it drag the encounter out that people are twiddling their thumbs. No. But if it's going to make things more exciting, go for it. And it gives the players more story points to play with.
Exactly. Well, guys, that was an amazing episode dealing with the setting roulette. So that needs to be a hashtag on Twitter, campaign roulette. So look, that's something else as well. As we mentioned earlier, though, if you've got because we'll do campaign roulette again. I think that was a lot of fun. But if you've got some suggestions on things to throw into the campaign roulette for our next time, let us know.
Yeah, I think if we make a bit of a library of ideas, we can chuck them all into a hat, and then we can just pluck out listener ideas when we do our next one. That'd be fantastic.
Than us coming up with everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly.
But
and you'll get a plug.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
give you a plug too, yeah. So if you're wanting to know a little bit more about the podcast, want to know about us, follow us on Facebook, which is at thediceballpodcast.com. No, sorry, it's not. It's at diceballpodcast.com. Just search for that, and you can also search for that on Twitter as well. You can go to the website, which is www.thediceballpodcast.com, and you can also keep an eye out on my posts that I put up on the FFG website under their forums. And hey, look, if you've got a topic you want to discuss or anything else, let us know. Send us an email, which is info@thediceballpodcast.com.
And we may not always get to it immediately, but we are going to look at getting these ideas onto the show.
Exactly right. And don't forget to give us a rating, because the more ratings that we get, the higher up in the list we go for when people are searching. And also, if you find that you can't listen to us on your pod feeder, let us know. We can make a few inquiries as well, because that's something that I've noticed. There's a couple of pod feeders that aren't picking us up yet, so we'll make a few inquiries. So if you do have one, let us know. But anyway, so thanks for listening, everybody. I'm GM Hurley.
I'm GM Huz.
I'm GM Flano.
And I'm GM Caitlin.
And together, we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains a property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, the Genesis logo, content and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.